why are you passionate about NDEs and helping other people about life after death and what happens when we die? What motivates you?
Well, certainly having been around it, starting at the age of 5. But I think because there are a lot of ways that you can give back. If you've had a life like I have and my wife has, and where we believe we must have been in the same soul group and we must have been here before, and we were here for a reason. There are a lot of ways you could give, and I think the worst is, and the least effective is money. It just goes into the same hole. And you know, we've seen that around the world. It doesn't seem to make anybody better off. It results maybe in more people who aren't better off. That's about it. Or it's a Band-Aid approach. If we're going to leave something behind, I think it's one of the better things you can leave behind is something that makes people feel more like themselves and not the person they think they ought to be, and that they are at peace with the fact that they're going to transition just like those before them and those after. I think both of those things are very important in terms of people's happiness on the planet, the way they treat each other, and more importantly, the way they treat themselves. And I remember once we were a family that always had a dinner around the dinner table formally every night, and you know, all 5 of us. And I remember when I was about 16 or so. 16 is an age where, you know, you're really quite omniscient. You really understand everything there is in the world, and you can always reduce it to a single sentence, which your parents always called a one-liner. So anyway, I had that massive ability when I was 16, and I turned to my father one night and said, "Dad," he being a psychiatrist, "since we all know people don't change, what is it exactly you try to do with your patients?" And there was silence in the room, and my mother looked at the ceiling like, "Oh God, he's going to get sent to his room again." But my father thought for a moment, then he said, "Well, I don't try to change anyone. I just try to increase the ratio of their voluntary actions to their involuntary ones." That stuck with me as, you know, okay, accepting the person the way they are, and he wants them to do the same. And I think if you can leave the world a little bit better than you found it, that's really your job when you're here. And I think this is one way to leave it. And I do think there is some sort of Maharaji effect where you see there's a ripple effect where you do the tiniest little thing and you find out 3 years later, you know, that one day when you said something to me, boy, did that make a difference in my life. I said, what? But it's true. The tiniest things that you do can have a ripple effect that add to making the world a better place and people in it feeling that sense. And I think that's why people gravitate towards the research that you know, was done by Sheldrake, who did his experiments with rats and their consciousness and swimming through mazes, and find out that that consciousness went from his rats, which took 20 tries to get through the maze. Once they learned, so did the rats in Scotland, and so did the rats in Australia at the same time. Now, how the hell did that happen? Amazing consciousness. And how do you have things like entanglement, where you could split a proton, take it thousands of miles away, and you turn one half here and watch the other one turn there at the same time? They're connected. And we don't understand how it works, but we don't need to. And so I think sharing that with people, even if you only reach 10 or 20% of them, makes it very, in fact, if you even reach one of them, is worthwhile.
Well, that's what I always say. Even if this episode helps one person, my job is done. So I absolutely agree with you. Ben, I've asked all the questions. Is there something you'd like to share with the Passion Harvest audience that I haven't asked you?
I suppose I would just add that, you know, people's ability to withstand trauma is very, very different from person to person. And in the culture we were in, I had a number of friends who were shot down over North Vietnam, and they were POWs, and they went through years of torture, and then not knowing if they'd ever be free again. And I spent a fair amount of time with a number of them afterwards, as well as reading debriefs from them. And regardless of their backgrounds, they withstood that incredibly well, and they came out of it incredibly well. And a lot of them stayed in the Navy and continued to serve until their retirement. Others didn't. But their spouses didn't deal well with having somebody come back 5 years later. You know, but I mean, they did and they didn't, you know, because they had become independent. Or maybe worse, they were with someone else. But I think the fact that they came out of it being more spiritual, and I knew several who were that way. You could sense it when you walked in the room or when you sat and talked to them about anything. We had, I think, 2 commanders who were commanding squadrons on my ship, and they were the ones who would go out of their way and come down to where I was and say, "Thank you for doing a good job," or things like that other people wouldn't bother to do. And you know, they were that kind of people. And
they were POWs, prisoners of war.
POWs for a long period of time. Yeah. And I think that shows that there's an incredible resilience, and that love can come out of it instead of anger. And I think that's something that we can all share in, and we can all help spread around and keep our minds open.